Welcome, everybody, to Get Closer. We have a special guest today, Gary Wayne, author of the book Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2 is out, hot off the presses. How are you doing, Gary? Glad to have you here.
Well, doing very well, and thank you for inviting me to your podcast and looking forward to the conversation today. And, I'm not sure how many of your listeners are aware of me, but if we do things right and I do things properly, maybe we'll raise a few eyebrows today.
Yeah. I think it says it all in the title, right?
Yep.
Genesis 6 Conspiracy. It's like stuff you don't hear about in churches mostly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm so blessed to have you on, and I know my audience will love it. And like I said, I'm not quite done with the first book, but I'll be getting the second one ASAP because it's hot off the presses and it has nothing but 5-star reviews so far on Amazon.com. So yeah, can you tell people where the best place to get your book is?
Sure. The easiest way to get a hold of my book is through my website, through the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the number 6conspiracy.com. And on that website, I have a generous excerpt of all 84 chapters of book two and all 98 chapters of book one. So they are, loaded with information. There's a generous excerpt up there. It's just a drop in the bucket as to what's in the book. So if you think you've got it all, that's just teaser information.
Yeah,
And it never stops coming at you. So yeah, so
that's book one.
that's book one, and there's over 100 pages of endnotes there. But book two's got a little bit different format
Okay.
because it has all the annotations, all the footnotes on the same page.
Wow.
Because book two is a little bit different approach than book one. So book one is written from a significant Christian biases, but one of the things I wanted to do there was sort of make Christians aware of how the world works that we live in. And I have a lot of outside information in their own testimony, and I let them speak in their own words to and because I don't want think people to say that, hey, you manipulated it. So I give you the
Right.
words, I give you the source, you can verify it for yourself and how that intersects with the Bible. So we cover a lot of things off in the Bible, but we also cover off, their perspective of prehistory, what
Yeah.
they've done over
I love
our
that about the
history.
book because I'm almost
Yeah,
halfway through and I love that because it
yeah,
it takes the true history of where did we get all this crap from, you know?
yeah. It'll help you understand the whole world. And it starts to get you into the understanding of we need to understand prehistory to understand prophecy. It's the full context for the creation of the Adamites and how things are going to play out. So the principles and the values are awesome in the Bible, absolutely, and what we teach in Christianity, but they're taught without the context of prehistory and prophecy. So book one is kind of one of the most unique books that may be out on the marketplace. And it is something in the genre that is absolutely unique. There's nothing out there like it. And it's a 6,000-year investigation into the House of Dragon, the visible ones on the
Wow.
earth, and it gives you some information as to the invisible ones as well. So book two,
I
I
really,
wasn't good. I
if
wasn't
I
going
could
to
just
write it.
talk about first one, the book
Yeah,
one, I really
it,
love the balance there because what people in all corners of the world and different perspectives have the tendency to do is once they get a hold of a truth, it's extremely this way with it or extremely against it. And I always
yeah.
find God's always like in the middle and the truth is in there. So I love how you have the balance of showing it everything under that context.
Well, because we need to understand how God is letting things play out. I mean, he can intercede, he does intercede, but he only intercedes to make sure all the names in the book of life have an opportunity to keep their name in the book of life and not
Yeah.
have it blotted out. So that intercession is only done to make sure all of those names that were created and written before creation have that opportunity. So if we want to understand why God lets things go go on in the world, we have to understand he believes in free choice in
Yep.
this epoch for sure. And I would think ongoing, although the consequences after would suggest that you might be foolish not to go with God's ways, which as we see being played out on the earth, only leads to destruction if you're not following God's ways.
Yeah.
And so if we want to understand why things go on in the world, we have to understand that there's a limited time to fill all those names in the book of life. And God is Alpha Omega, as is Jesus, and they knew everything that was going to happen. But they loved the spirits that they created so much from before creation that they'll be patient and let the rebellious ones and the spurious ones convict themselves, because it's all through free choice. And just as angels had free choice to choose God or not, and they knew God intimately, many chose to rebel. And according to end time prophecy, as many as a third will have rebelled. Whether they all rebelled at the beginning in pieces, that's really kind of irrelevant. It's just we have a final number, and we know it's a large number because in both Revelations and Daniel it talks about 10,000 times 10,000 angels, which is 100 million, and then other references to the angels is they're uncountable. So that could be just an allegorical number and be bigger, right? So, but if it is 100,000 and a third rebel, that means depending on how you want to make that third, it's either 33 million or 50 million.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a lot, and not all of them are in the pit prison.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important that it's 1/3, still 2/3 for us.
Still 2/3 that are loyal, but things are being played out so that the lake of fire that was created for them
Yep.
will be played out, and they will convict themselves. So yeah, it's important to understand that humankind, the reason why we're going to be raised above angels is because we were created mortal. Yes, Adam had access to the tree of life until the deception in the garden. But in the physical world, that was where that immortal life would be versus in heaven. And so it's important to understand that humans were created mortal and without intimate knowledge of God. And thus through faith,
find it out for yourself and have
that
free will choice.
That free will choice to secure that information yourself and not have it all or most of it. And certainly the angels did not have all the secrets or wisdom of God. As First Corinthians talks about, if the princes, the arches of the world were aware of the resurrection, they would not have insisted or assured that Jesus was crucified, right?
Yeah.
Because that basically ended their rebellion. Yeah, it was. Yes, there still was some time to be played out, but I think that's who he went to speak to the ones in the pit prison while he was in the grave in First Peter. So I think it's important to understand that we're going to be raised higher than angels in eternity, as inheritors of eternity, and that we're going to judge those angels for their crimes against us and crimes against the earth and
inheritance that we have. I think it just blows my mind of what it says in Ephesians, that we have an inheritance to give him from our free will little mortal lives in this little time that we're here on earth.
Yeah.
And it's a gift.
And we're also assured that God is going to write on our hearts. And so one deduces within the spirits that we'll have more control over the soul and the body in an uncorrupted world in eternity, that we'll be able to follow the ways of God and not have to worry about stumbling. And of course, in the meantime, we are all sinful and we all stumble, but that's why the Alpha Omega plan was always about, if things played out through free choice, that and inevitably that they knew how it would play out, that you would have to send Jesus as the Redeemer to ensure that the sins would be forgiven and we could be raised into eternity to be like angels, but even though we have human fathers.
Yeah, man, it's truly glorious, the power he's giving us. in this
Yeah.
little short life frame that, and then
Yeah.
you have extreme one side, oh come Jesus come, and it's like
Yeah.
his time is mercy. It's giving more time for those who are
It
not
is.
yet awakened to
Yes.
awaken to the true reality that's being played out
Yes.
here.
Yes. And so we should view the creation of Adamites as, in my opinion, and my understanding, and I'm not a minister, I'm just a researcher. So I think the Adamites were created as the resolution to the angelic rebellion that will play out in the ordained time when it's reserved for. So yes, this is how we get that opportunity that God knew would come along, but it has to play out that way. So there's perfect justification for those who are going to be resurrected, and perfect justification that who will receive the second death, and perfect justification for those who are going to remain in the lake of fire forever.
Yeah. And the beauty and the glory of how he made us too, even though we're weak in our mortal frames, he made us in his image.
Yes.
And I think like we're just my opinion, I'll throw out my opinion. We're made unlike I think any other creation that's listed that we have to go by
Yep.
in being able to relate to the uncreated God because we're made in his image.
Yep.
And so we have those capacities, those wide range of emotions because he does. We have
Yes.
mental capacities with the different facets of our human nature,
Yep.
our man-like nature, because we're made in his image.
Yeah. And the things that God creates, um, and allows and permits, whether it's emotions or it's knowledge, is not evil. It's neither good nor evil. It's how those things are applied. So, and you have to have the discipline and the wisdom to apply those things, which we tend to lack at this point in time. But the point of it is that I think in this experience is to have the spirit to do the best that you can, understanding you're going to fall short because nobody is in the same classification as Jesus, who came into a corrupt world and never sinned. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a standard that is only, the word of God, or the, as I like to say, the logos of the Theos, or the Jehovah of the Elohim has the ability to do. So and he did it for us.
Yeah.
And I just can't imagine the Word who created all things knew from the beginning that how it was going to play out, and he would have to come and suffer the way that he did. But yet
Yeah.
he did it willingly, and it wasn't easy. I mean, he was crying out from the cross to Abba, his father.
And even
And
before then, what was that about with the tears that he knew he was going in the Garden of Gethsemane and the tears with
yeah,
blood and the sweating
yep,
of blood and stuff? Man.
yes, yep.
Yeah. And I heard an interesting take. I think it was Chuck Missler on the whole fall situation and what he saw, what God could have seen in us, and his plan to redeem us through his son. And we're also referred to as his bride, and Jesus as the
Hmm.
bridegroom.
Yes.
And so Adam being the bride and Eve being the bride, or Adam being the bridegroom and Eve being the bride, when she fell, he was like, well, what if it happened like this? Because we're not given much in the translation of what actually transformed or happened.
Hmm.
But what if it happened to where Eve knew she messed up and came running to Adam, and Adam saw that and knew that he would be separate from her. And
Yeah.
he said, I'm going with you, kind of babe. Like I'm not gonna leave you alone, and took a bite of the apple as well.
Yeah, we're not really told that but somehow Adam is persuaded, whether it's to not be separated or to understand the additional knowledge, um, or not. So we're not really told
Yeah.
explicitly or detailed as to what was going through the heads. And we're not told why Eve would be susceptible to wanting to be like God.
Right.
I,
Right.
I guess it's enticing if somebody were to offer that to you. But they didn't have knowledge of good and evil at that point in time either.
Right.
So they were being persuaded by evil
Yeah. It's
and
just
not,
like a little kid, they don't know, they don't have that filter of right and wrong yet.
yeah,
It's only set in standard by their mother and father.
yeah. So, and the difference is after Eden is we know there's evil in the world, and yet we're still seduced by the same temptations.
Yeah.
And that's one of the ultimate lessons. And, even in the millennium, after the end time, there is going to be people who are going to rebel. And I think that's a time that is set aside, for the completion of the names in the book of life, because it's obviously the earth is going to be repopulated and being from almost completely wiped out. And that I think that is a time where it's to show humans that we are no better than the angels.
Right.
That just as the angels knew God and Jesus intimately,
Right.
so will we as he rules on earth. And yet there will be a rebellion after Satan is released after 1,000 years. So I think it's just everything is covered off in the patience and the love that God has to sit through all these horrible things that he knew would transpire, but he wants us to choose whether angelic or human, him. And
Yeah.
it's the only way that it's sustainable going into eternity.
Yeah, yeah, and I just love that perspective that that minister Chuck Missler had on it, because that sounds more like God, like us in the image of God too,
Yeah.
not wanting to be separated from this amazing, beautiful being that he just made
Yeah.
from Adam's rib and said, "You guys are going to be fruitful,
Yeah.
multiply, do all this together," and him
Yeah.
having love and wanting to fall for her, and I could see God being like, "I'm going to save him."
Yeah.
That
And,
way.
and Mr. Misler was a very, very intelligent and researched and informative people. I would encourage people to seek out his books and writings and read those. They're all worthwhile.
Yeah,
I've not read all of them, but I've read several and I have a few in my library behind me. So
yeah, he's a great man of God,
yeah.
great gift, that's for
Yeah.
sure to us. Yeah. But yeah, it's just if you can kind of give the context for those who have maybe never heard of Genesis 6 and like what are these guys talking about, maybe we can lay some ground for that, because I know a lot of people
Yeah.
a lot of people still may not have heard of that, and then you get the extremes, right? You get the people, oh yeah, it all went bad here, and then go crazy. And I love the way your book just puts out facts from all angles,
Yeah.
history and religions and all of that.
Yeah. So one of the concepts of book one is that there is a worldwide legacy that talks about the same type of events in prehistory and history and with their own prophecy from different cultures and religions through a polytheist lens versus the monotheist lens that we would view things. And it's important to understand that. So when we talk about this legacy, it's in all cultures on all continents all around the world. But we get the truth, the unmanipulated truth in the Bible versus the polytheist biases versus you could call it a Christian biases, but I would say biases of truth. But I am biased. So, and so Genesis 6 is talked about right around the world in all cultures, in all continents, in all religions, and it's the flood story. And what's interesting though is the preamble to the flood story. And in the preamble, bookended by the genealogy that finishes in chapter 5 with Noah and his 3 sons, you have 4 really discombobulating passages that when I first read, when I wanted to research prophecy because I wanted to know whether Hal Lindsey was accurate or not, and I had to start to log things in the Bible. Every time I would get to Genesis 6 verses 1 through 4, I'm going, whatever they're talking about with giants, I don't want anything to do. That's crazy talk. So, but eventually in doing the research on prophecy, I understand there's a relationship to fallen angels, giants, and demons, and we need to understand that. And so I started to log some of that and to try and become familiar with what the heck are giants doing in the Bible.
Yeah.
So this has the sons of God who are going to go to human females and create giants, or some of the English translations will mean Nephilim, will be translated as Nephilim. That is the transliterated word out of Hebrew. And some people doesn't think it doesn't mean giant.
Yeah, I was just going to hint at that because people will take, oh, well, it says the sons of God. Well, it kind
Yeah.
of alleviates that when it says come into the daughters of men.
Yeah, you would think, but it's because there are other references in the Old Testament to the sons of God or children of God, as it refers to Israel,
Right.
in some prophecies for the end time, not for the flood, in Hosea and the book of Isaiah, which is perfectly consistent with the understanding of the sons of God as humans in the New Testament that comes because of the crucifixion and implemented as doctrine at the time of the Pentecost, that we will be resurrected to be like angels in the future time. So it's prophetic. It's not have
Yeah.
anything to do with the Old Testament. So when we look at the word in book 2, we'll talk more about it later, but I was convinced to write book 2 because Christians seem to require even more information. And so book 2 is written directly at Christians. And I said I would never write
Oh,
a
wow.
sequel, but the demand for wanting to know all the things about angels and giants and demons and prophecy in the Bible sort of had me drop the book I was writing to write book 2, and then now back to writing
Cool.
that other book. So how do we know that the sons of God are humans? And one of the things that people can also do, I'll just throw this out, and I have a great document. If you go to the website, contact the author, ask for the documents and how we know the sons of God are angels, and or I'll send you both anyways, and how we know the sons of God are not humans. So I'll give you both biblically based arguments, and I put that all in book 2 as well. So you've got it all there. So
Cool.
yeah, we have some passages of the sons of God elsewhere that we can kind of rely on.
Right.
And so you'll have Job 1:6 and 2:1 that talks about the sons of God who went to present themselves at the throne of God in heaven, not as on earth, as some people would change the meaning of that. And I
Right.
get that that could God set up a throne on earth? Sure, he could, right?
Yeah, but that's
He
what
can
he's
do
coming to
anything.
do when he makes all things
Yeah,
new
yeah,
later.
yeah. But we don't have scripture for that.
Right.
So I would encourage people not to add on to scripture. And if you do, say you're speculating. So angels are required to report, and Satan reports at the same time. He's a fallen one, but he has a special obligation even after he's been degraded versus some of the other fallen angels that went to the pit prison, both
Yeah.
before and after the flood. So we have sons of God used there. So I understand that that's an argument. But if you get the same understanding, the same term in the same book as in the book of Job, that would be something that you could not make an excuse for, that these are humans, or
Right.
rationalize is a better word, that these are humans. I would go to Job 38, 4-7, where it says the morning stars. Stars are understood as an order of angels, as I will talk about in book 2. And
Yeah.
stars are an allegory for angels. And the sons of God sang for joy at creation. Well, we were not there at creation.
No.
Only the angels were, as Psalms 104 talks about.
Right.
And so we have that, but still there's another passage that's interesting is we have the council of the gods in Psalms 82, the sons of the Most High. And again, that's the same term only for the fallen angels, again, just as you can have sons of God that are loyal angels and sons of God that are the fallen ones. And these are
Right.
the fallen ones in their assembly that Satan sits atop of, that rules over the 70 nations, both before and after the flood.
Yeah.
And so we get that as, but still, I know it's hard when you have this cognizant dissonance in your brain about these giants and what you've been told in the churches, who want to avoid the topic like crazy. I don't know why, because the Bible is the most preternatural book ever written. Why you would accept some of the preternatural stories and not others is kind of not consistent, but it is what
Yeah.
it is. So there are other ways we can know that the sons of God are angels, is because biblically, and you notice I haven't gone to extracurricular
Yeah,
uh,
stuff yet.
passages. So, because and if I do use them, I measure it against what the Bible says.
Yep. Yeah, because it
And
was
if it's,
quoted. If you're
yeah,
talking about Enoch, it was quoted in the Bible, you know.
sure, absolutely. And they use the term sons of God there. I will put that in a detailed way in book 2, but for the sake of keeping it to what's in the Bible, that
Right.
if people who are really pushing back on,
Or
I would
struggling
say,
with it, wrestling with it in their conceptions and
yeah,
perception.
there are passages in the Old Testament where stars are used with angels, as in the sons of God in Job 38. There are stars and the host of heaven, as in Daniel 8, where you have some of the starry host um, who are trampled on by Antichrist in the end time. You have angels and the host of heaven, and stars as being accounted as fallen angelic beings that people worship on earth in the Old Testament. So you have the circular arguments supporting the different descriptions of who the sons of God were understood as in the time of the flood. And these were the rebellious ones who, in their second revenge, as I talk about in book 1, versus the first revenge, which was by Satan in Eden to bring down Adam, now he's going to create spurious offspring by deceiving his followers as fallen angels to procreate something that is a violation against the Holy Spirit and violation against the laws of creation, to be the terrible ones, as they're described in Ezekiel 32 and Isaiah 14 and Isaiah 25 and other passages, as these terrible ones who are going to do terrible things to humankind. They're
Yeah,
there, they're there to wipe humankind from the face of the
the
earth.
earth. Yeah, they hate us. They hate God's image in us. And
And
the funny thing is
yep,
like, so how do you equate that then? If you think sons of God, or if you just say you think they are man, even though it says came into the daughters of men
yeah,
after sons of God, how does that create a giant?
yeah.
Because God did not create that in the original order.
Well, and the argument that comes back, I've had
I bet you have. That's why I'm
I
like,
get them all, and you
yeah,
need to be able to answer them all, right?
right,
Which is important, because we don't want to take the Bible out of its understanding,
right,
pro or for against
yeah,
giants. We want it to be what the Bible actually says. And so, yeah, I mean, you can't do extraordinary things as a human. You can't be larger, or you can't have additional powers. And what happens with the transference of DNA from the angels when they take a bodily form is that they pass on gifts. So what's interesting in Genesis 6:3, one of the gifts is immortality of the body and of the Xerox, so to speak, counterfeit spirit passed on by the fallen angels that you have created gods within the physical world.
mm,
Kind of what Satan was also offering Adam and
yeah,
Eve, right?
yeah, yeah. You should be
It,
like God.
yeah, pretty much identical. And there's this knowledge that I talk about that's part of the mystical religions that comes out of the seven sciences created by Enoch, son of Cain, and there's two
Yeah, can
Enochs
you
in the
touch on
Bible.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, we'll come back to that.
okay.
Otherwise, I'll be down on too many rabbit trails, because
It's amazing, man. I
they're
just
all
love it.
interesting. So
Yeah,
that they're created these immortal bodies and these immortal spirits. Now, the spirit is immortal, so it can't be killed in a way that we would understand it.
right. And
And
they're not going to be
so,
dealt with till the
yeah.
final judgment. You right?
Now, in one of the great manipulations of prehistory that is taught, is that 120 years was the commission of Noah to build the ark, except the math doesn't work. And I don't believe Alpha Omega would make a math error, or there would be written down as a math error. So if you look
Yeah,
at the
I don't
verses,
either.
I won't go through all of the verses right now, but if you go through the verses, you understand that from the time of the birth of the sons to the time Noah enters the ark is 100 years, not 120. And if you look at the language and you take that back to the Hebrew, it's clearly talking about the spirit isn't going to be, his spirit isn't going to be in the world
Striving with
permanently.
man forever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So he's going to say the bodies, the soul and the body, which are part of the physical world, and the spirit comes from heaven. And then when a human dies, the soul and body is what decays in this world, and our spirit, according to Ecclesiastes, goes back to heaven and in a sleep-like state. As we're told, we sleep hundreds and hundreds of times in the Bible. But the counterfeit spirit isn't permitted to sleep, but the body dies. And it becomes the disembodied spirits. And we see these show up as devil spirits in the New Testament that Jesus is talking about.
Going to and fro throughout the dry places of the earth. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're also referenced in the same context as unclean spirits and
Mhm.
evil spirits, but they're used interchangeably in these accounts.
Yep.
And so when we look at that word devil, it's not a fallen angel that is doing this. It's the word is daemon. The word for
Disembodied.
devil, yeah, the word for devil, as it's associated with Satan, is diablos, not daemon. And you never have daemon associated with Satan. So these are daemon spirits, which is the Greek word, source word for demon in English.
Yeah.
And
Disembodied spirit.
these are the disembodied spirits, yes. And so they are either going to, in the occult belief, make it to the occult heaven where the fallen angels not in the pit prison rule from, in Hades, Sheol, the other world, and when Argatha, the 10,000 different names they have there for it.
Yeah.
That, and we see that in the occult rituals, whether it's the Egyptian sailing on a boat into the other world, or in the Ugaritic texts where the Raphaim are going to take these dead kings into the other world through a portal, and all around the world, it's the same sort of
Yeah.
ritual. So
They'll
whether they
crack up
get
at
their,
you when
yeah,
you
what,
say, "Oh, you're a Satan worshiper," and they'll just crack up at you, and they're
yeah,
thinking, "No, I worship Ein Sof." And it's
yeah,
like, wait a minute, who's Ein Sof? Oh,
yeah,
he's a snake in a tree. Who's that
yeah.
sound like?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Satan has many different names.
Yep.
We need to know that, and different looks as well.
Yeah. He
And
can come as an angel of light. Yeah.
yes, or as as the anointed cherubim,
Mm-hmm.
or as a dragon and a serpent,
Yeah. That's why
um,
the Bible tells us to
or as a
test the
yeah,
spirits.
yeah, or as a morning star. That's the
Mm-hmm.
bright aspect,
Yeah.
and different names for each. So we need to be aware of that. And Halel would be the bright shining star name, which is in Isaiah 14, where you have a Italian word substituted for a Hebrew word into English. So it should be Halel ben Shakar, as the Hebrew is. It should be Halel, son of the morning, not Lucifer, which is the god of the Gnostics and the secret societies.
There you
It just ought not to be there. Not all translations have Lucifer in there, but that should not be translated accordingly.
go. Yeah.
And so you have two other places where these disembodied spirits can go. One is roaming the earth as in dry places, and they need an oiketerion, or a soul and a body, to possess, to interact physically in this world, and a place of rest, because they have no place of rest. Or
Right.
the other place that they're going to go, and this is so interesting in why Isaiah 14 and other passages, but particularly Ezekiel 32 on the terrible ones, these are the terrible ones that are in the prisons in the sides of the pit prison there for doing terrible things to humankind and were slain. There's also the fallen angels there that's in there in Ezekiel 32 in the KG translation, where it says the mighty are also talking to, guess what, another Rephaim giant, Pharaoh of the beast empire bloodlines.
Wow.
And that is the Hebrew word El, small case, for an angel or a god.
Yep.
And they're also speaking to Pharaoh from there in this really unique dual, what I would call a dual prophecy. So Yeah, it's this understanding of prehistory helps us to understand that when people say that they're talking to their ancestors in seances or hypnotism or past lives, or they're dealing with spirit guides, these are not humans.
Yeah,
None
and
of
you
them.
shouldn't trust anything they say because they are
Yeah.
master deceivers and they've been around for thousands of years and they know a lot more than you do.
Yeah, they're liars.
Yes, their job is to steal, kill,
Yeah.
and destroy. And they're
So
the
then
father
people,
of lies. Yeah.
but then people say, as in the book of Psalms, in the book of Hebrews, that angels are spirits, so they can't have sex with humans.
Yeah,
Just as
yeah. I've heard
Matthew,
that one before
yeah,
too. Yeah.
just as Matthew, the book of Matthew talks about that there's no sex in heaven, but they never like to really utilize Luke's account, which is a much more expanded version on it, that basically says that um, we're going to be like angels when we go to heaven. That's after the resurrection, where there's
Yeah,
no
and you
need
have a
for
new
sex in
body
heaven.
and
Yeah.
everything, and you're made like
So
Jesus when you see him. And yeah.
yeah. So, but still they stick on to it and they say, but if you can't do it in heaven, you can't do it on earth. Well, of course, that's why it's a violation against the laws of creation. But here's how they do it. And here's how we know they can do it. So if we look at the book of Genesis, you have in Genesis 18 and 19 a very revealing passage about angels. And we have angels descriptions in various forms throughout the Bible, but you have Jehovah of the Elohim making a physical body for himself so that he can interact physically with Abraham.
Yeah.
Because he touches, he eats, he speaks, he
Has him in the
and
tent, says, hey, come.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And the angels that accompany him, Abraham doesn't at first recognize them as angels.
Mm.
So they can be in human form and you would not know them. And then these two angels go on to Sodom, but yet the people in Sodom knew they were angels, even though they
Yeah.
were described as men. So they can make themselves known. And then for people who say, well, you don't have a New Testament version on it. Well, of course I do.
Hebrews.
Hebrews, yeah. If Hebrews 13 is probably the best accounting for it, where it says to be nice to strangers, lest you come across an angel unaware.
Unawares. I've had that happen before, I believe.
Oh, I'm sure we all have.
Yes.
I
Yes.
just hope I reacted properly.
Yeah. Same here. Same here, brother.
So you should, yeah, that's why we get that kind of warning. So if they can make an oiketerion for themselves, a soul and a body, then they would have DNA in that oiketerion, and that would be passed on, which is how they do it. And
Right.
for that term oiketerion, that comes from Jude 1:6 in the word habitation,
Mm.
that the angels left, where it's
Left their
talking about the
first
angelic,
estate. Yeah.
yeah, to do the crimes that they did. And then that word means a dwelling place for a spirit. They
Wow.
left a dwelling place for their spirit in heaven, and they can be as a spirit being in this world, but not interact physically unless
Right.
they have that oiketerion, which
Yeah.
is the
Unless they
soul
take
and
it
the
on.
body. So
Yeah.
just as we have our spirit merge with the soul, and only God and Jesus can separate the spirit from the soul.
And people have a real spiritual encounters and
Yep.
experiences all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, is that's the oiketerion. We get oiketerion used one other time in the New Testament, which again is quite revealing as understanding this dwelling place or a home, right? A home for where the
Yeah.
spirit is going to be. And that's in 2 Corinthians 5:2, where it says house in heaven. That's oiketerion, and it's the house in heaven that we are desiring and
Yeah. That
craving
we
for.
long for, our souls
Yeah,
crying out
yeah.
for.
Now,
Yeah.
variations of the oiketerion word are used throughout, but only specifically as the dwelling place. It's only used twice in the Greek in the New Testament. So that's how it's done. And that's why there is a oiketerion created for Jesus through Mary by the Holy Spirit, that as a spirit being, he becomes flesh as the word,
Mm-hmm.
and that it has nothing to do with sex of any sort, but it allows him to do his commission and to
Yep.
be fully affected by the whole world and to be crucified without sin for the world. So,
Yeah,
and it
to
also
make a way
answers,
for us back to
yeah,
the Father in heaven and what we were originally
yeah,
created for. Yeah.
and also answers why Melchizedek was blessed, or Melchizedek blessed Abraham, who's going to be the father of Israel to create the tribe of Judah, who's going to produce David, and that lineage is going to produce Mary.
Yeah. Wow, man.
And right. And because that, again, according to the book of Hebrews, Melchizedek has no genealogy, no beginning or
Right.
end.
And
He's an
we are
Alpha
going to be,
Omega.
and he made us kings and priests according to the
Yeah.
order of Melchizedek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why he inherits us as the immortal, as being replaced. And I think part of the resolution to the fall of Satan, who was probably high priest as well.
Yeah. Yeah. He was in charge of the praise to
Yeah.
Yahweh. Yeah. And so what's interesting there, I don't know if I told you or not, but yeah, I do deliverance too. I'm a deliverance minister. And so disembodied spirits just says it in the name. What are they looking for? A body. They're
Yeah.
looking for a body to inhabit and get their lust, their personalities through, all while defiling God's
Yeah.
image that they hate.
Yeah. And in the Old Testament, we get a couple of passages that aren't recognized as talking about these types of spirits. And so in um, Psalms 106 and Deuteronomy 32, it's talking about devils that are sacrificed to. So just as devils are talked about in the New Testament, where it goes back to daemon, not diablos, and this doesn't go back to um, uh, a word that we have for devil in the Old Testament, because we don't get another specific word that is directly linked as a root word for devil. But what we do get is the Hebrew word shade or shed or shade, depending on how you want to pronounce that, which means a demon spirit.
Surprise.
Surprise, surprise, surprise. And with the post-Diluvian giants, you have the Rephaim.
Right. Yeah,
And
the
the people,
Rephaim. Then
and so book two, right?
that means the people of the dead, right? In Hebrew tongue.
Well, it has a few different meanings. But the Rephaim the uh, are post-Diluvian giants, and here's how it connects to the dead. So you have 7495 um, in the Greek, not in the Greek, in the Hebrew lexicon for the Old Testament, and that's Rapha, Rapha, and it means healer.
Hmm.
And so you put that into a name, like say, as an angel in the Apocrypha, Raphael, and it
Raphael. Yeah, that's what I thought of.
means God heals or
Yep.
healer of God. But also understand Baal is in the occult, has names, and is thought to be equivalent to the loyal Raphael.
Hmm.
And so he has names that have just different spellings as a counterfeit. But again, all angels have multiple names. Baal as being Lord God, Lord Master, Master of God, all sorts of different names. As the Al is the transliterated El for
Right.
an angel or a god. And so Rapha 7495 is the source word for 7497, which is the tribe of giants. And how do we
Oh.
know they're a tribe of giants? A, it's defined as that out of Hebrew. B, they show up as a tribe in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants.
Yeah.
And then they show up as a tribe in Genesis 15 in the land that's being promised to Abraham,
Yeah.
from the Nile to the Euphrates. And there's other giants in there and hybrid giants that are also listed in the Mighty Seven and the Mighty 10, as I like to group the additional triple K in there. So people look up Genesis 15, you'll see three tribes, K, K, and K. I won't tell you who they are off the top, but just to give you a little project to do. But what's also interesting is Rapha is used in a totality for giants 25 times, where it says giant, it goes back to the Hebrew root 7497, Rapha.
Yeah.
And so Nephilim is only used 3 times.
Right.
And the difference is that the Rephaim are the post-Diluvian giants,
Right.
and the Nephilim, even as they're described in Numbers 13:33 in the embellished part of the report, aren't really Nephilim because they're describing the Anakim kings, Sheshai, Talmai, and Ahiman, and the Anakim are described in Deuteronomy 2 as giants, but not as Nephilim, as Rephaim. The Bible is not in contradiction. What's going on here is the Israelites are testifying to the veracity of the larger and more powerful giants before the flood, and they're trying to terrify the rest of Israel, and they are successful in doing so, not to go into the covenant land to take on these monsters.
Right.
And so they embellish it. Not that they weren't giants. They were clearly giants, as other passages describe them, but they weren't the Nephilim. They were they're smaller and less powerful. And that doesn't mean that, yeah. And so 7496 is the disembodied spirit word that is also sourced in 7495. And it can mean a demon spirit, an evil spirit, and it can also
spirit, wicked spirit,
and also translated as death, as it comes into English, as in the book of Job, where you have death and Rapha, and there's a couple other passages, and I'll note that in book 2 as well for people. So it's associated with death, as in disembodied spirits, and their spirits aren't sleeping.
Right.
Right. And they're all interconnected to give you the larger meaning. Now we get all of that put together in the Bible, but it's not really sort of connected. But if we go outside the Bible and we go to the Ugaritic text, which is written in the original Semitic languages, which was originally vowelless as Hebrew was originally vowelless, and it is the source language for Hebrew, we can make a lot of direct connections. And so the Baalim and Baal and Anat are in there as creating their RPM, as it's in the original Semitic, and it's transliterated into English in various translations as Rapiu or Rapium. And it's akin to when you see the Nephilim pronounced Nephilim with a P and without the H. It's that same sort of evolution of the language. So just as the Hebrew language evolved to putting in the vowels, it also evolved in that case with the P adding an H in some cases. And so some people are really technical on the language. You'll say, I don't care what Strong says, do not pronounce it Nephilim. It's still the old Nephilim, but Strong says it's pronounced as an F. And then you get, even out of Hebrew, you get F as being used instead of a PH. So in some of their, so it's, don't get confused by that. It's the same sort of understanding. So they created after the flood the Rephaim, and their holy cities are Edrei and Ashtaroth. And if that sounds familiar, that's in the Bashan region at Mount Hermon, where King Og, the last of the giants, Rephaim in the male plural, ruled from. And there's even more connections there. So they created these giants, and they're doing fertility rituals to create more Rephaim because they have a reproduction issue. It's not for necessarily fertility, it's producing less women. And it's going to require them to intermarry amongst humans otherwise they're going to go extinct. Yeah. So they're described as giants and mighty ones, and GBR Gabur is in there as well, also as a tribe of giants, although biblically you have to be careful not to assign mighty one to describing giants, because not all of David's men would have been qualified to be giants because they're Israelites. So yes, you might have a hybrid like Uriah the Hittite or a Makathim, as I identify in book 2 as a giant tribe. And no patriarch listed in the table of nations. You qualify them as hybrid or Rephaim. So you want to be careful with that. But there is a tribe that's called the Gibborim in the Ugaritic text, and it's also used as mighty one as well.
Yeah, mighty man of valor back like in Genesis 6.
Yeah. Now these Rephaim kings and their assembly of the Tatanu, the assembly of giants at Mount Hermon, where the assembly of the Baalim are, that is talked about biblically, these are described as giants, as we've just talked about, and as dynastic kings, just as the royals are, kings of God, as you take that back on its etymology, just as AL is that transliteration of EL. In book 1, I call them Rex Deus, which is the Latin term for the same meaning. And you have them as giants, you have them as dynastic kings, and you have them as healers.
Wow.
And the word healer is not used just to heal others, but to heal themselves. So they had
There
this
you go.
ability, whether it's technology or part of the DNA, they were very hard to kill. That's why you have to behead a giant
Does that
to make
sound
sure that they
familiar
can't
in all the
recover.
depictings of Hollywood and all that
Yeah.
stuff with your Wolverines and stuff?
Yeah. So now what's interesting about the Rephaim that are described, it's the exact descriptions and same types of kings, just as the Ugaritic text actually goes back to the word Erit, which is the Hebrew word for the terrible ones that I talked about in Ezekiel 32,
Right.
and Og. That was probably the original city of King Og, who likely moves over to Mount Hermon after the War of Giants, after most of the Rephaim are wiped out, and rules over Amorites after that war. And one of the reasons why he's called the last of the Rephaim, right? So everything
Yeah.
starts to fit sort of biblically, and rules from the cities of Baal and Anat.
Cities.
Cities, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he had 12 pentapoles, 60 cities over his kingdom that the Israelites had to take on. And so we also get a description of Baal as a bull and the Baalim as bulls, just as Molech would be depicted as a bull.
Bull.
But their offspring were also called bulls.
Hmm.
And so when we look at the term Nephilim, people will say, well, some of the terms are bull and tyrant. Well, of course, that's part of the full meaning. They were called bullies. That's where the word bully
Bully
comes
comes
from.
from. Yeah.
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 And tyrant goes back to the Gyges and the Gyges kings that were bloodline after the flood and similar before the flood, but after the flood accountings has that Herculides bloodline or Zeus's bloodline of giants in Greek mythology that produced dynastic kings around Greece and in the Middle East as well. And so they were called in the Assyrian area of the Middle East and in the Anatolian or the Hittite area as tyrannos, as these dynastic giant kings that come from Zeus and alchemy, a human female after the flood, to produce Hercules in this dynastic level of kings. And so Tarwanos with a T-A-R spelling would be the Anatolian version of the same thing for their Indo-Aryan kings, which were giants that I explain in detail. And I make a lot of connections to
Yes.
in book one.
So
And
hold that thought.
yeah,
If you guys are listening to the encyclopedia and wealth of information that Gary has invested into these books, I encourage you get one. Challenge yourself, challenge your
yeah,
thinking, and dive into it for yourself. Like you said, he has the research to back it
yeah,
up. He's not just talking out of some Lululand or something that he's fascinated with. God put him on this mission, I
yeah,
feel, and he's revealed a lot of
yeah,
stuff. And I look forward to getting book 2 for my
yeah,
library as
yeah.
well.
Now, the word for the lords of the Philistines, as the Seranim, as you take that back to Hebrew, has an etymology back to these tyrannos. And so the Philistines weren't giants, they were hybrid giants, but they intermarried with giants and many giant nations that came with them when they expropriated Gaza in about, say, 1550 BC, and were one of the more powerful nations with their pentapoles and military complex that they set up. So that word goes back to the Philistines. It's an insertion into Hebrew with an etymology that goes back to Greek, to Tyrannos, through the Philistines, through Crete, and to the Indo-Aryans as the word Sar or Saran, also meaning prince, that interweaves in there. And so these were tyrants and bloodline kings of the giants again that show up in the Philistines. And so I make a little connection there in book 2, and I use other sources, or book 1 and use other sources. In book 2, I show you the whole etymology, taking it back. So
Yeah,
don't
and
let
the Hittites and the Jebusites,
yeah.
all the ites, right?
Yeah. So don't let people tell you that the word Nephilim all the terms don't refer to giants. All the words that are listed there describe the giants. That's where they're sourced from. And so then people say, well, it doesn't really mean giant. So it is, but you just have to stand in there and you have to sort of answer some of those questions. So of course they were giants. And that word, some people will say, well, giant doesn't mean giant, it means earthborn. Well, how do you get there? Well, through gigantic. Well, that's half the story. Gigantic is rooted in gigas, singular, with the E epsilon letter, it changes the G to a Y, or Gaies or Gyges. And in the plural, Giantes or Gigantes, as the word comes from Greek. So it sources through Giantes, as we get the pronunciation of giant is plural, and from Gygus and Gyes as its source word. So again, it means giant, and they're also earthborn because they come from human females
hence
in the
the
physical
mingling
world
of the DNA.
It's the full meaning of the word again. And again, watch out for people, whether it's eschatology or anything that they do, doctrine or prehistory, if they have to ignore certain aspects, that's a red flag.
Yes.
They like to leave out inconvenient passages or inconvenient
or just gloss
information.
over them, like, oh, that's what happened there, and moving on.
Yeah. So,
it's like, wait,
then people
what?
say, okay, so the word's fine, but they still weren't like these large people. They were like 7 feet tall. Well, not quite true. So biblically, we get Goliath, who is a son of the giants,
right?
Rapha.
Yeah, right.
And some people say that was the father's name, but it's also a tribe of giants, and it could be a generic name for giants as it's used. You have to watch the application, and don't just pick because Hebrew words and Greek words have a lot of different meanings. Don't pick, if you're going to take it back to Hebrew and Greek, which I encourage, don't be selective with biases. Pick the right meaning that doesn't conflict with the sentence it's in, the verse it's in, the narrative it's in, or any other passage in the Bible. Yes, it's a tough standard, but that's what you have to do.
And it's so much easier nowadays. We have it so much easier than having to have big lexicons and concordances and taking your time looking up. You got it right at your fingertips.
Yeah. And so Goliath is 6 cubits and a span. Well, and I make the case in book 1 and in book 2, I really nail it down that he would be a king and measured on a 21-inch cubit versus a standard 18-inch cubit. And Josephus says to measure the giants on a royal 21-inch cubit as well, because they were all the royals, all the nobility class. And so 6 cubits and a span would make him 11 feet 3 inches. And even if you use the shorter one, he'd be 9 feet 9 inches.
Right.
And he was described as stout. That's one of the significant words that are used that I really flesh out in book 2 is that word stout. It means muscularly wide, not flabby and fat, so to speak.
Like a huge Doug fir, hundreds of years old.
Yeah. So Og's bed was left on display for future generations in Rabbah for that the future generations would know the size of the people that they bought. And it was an iron bed.
Yeah.
Because wood would not hold his weight.
Nope.
And it was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. He was the king of Edrei and Ashtaroth. So clearly he's a king, just as I think Goliath was the king of Gath and was replaced by another king after Ashish, as I recall his name was, after Goliath was killed. And so that bed would have been close to 16 feet long on a royal cubit and 7 feet wide. So, and that is a 2-to-1 height to width ratio that they also wanted to have people remember, because the giants were extremely wide and muscular. The average height to width ratio of a human is 3-to-1, not 2-to-1. So more than twice the size, approaching 3 times the size from the biblical account. So for him to fit in his bed, minimum 12 feet, or I mean, he's going to be minimum 12 feet. He could be 11 feet, but now it's a really oversized bed, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But more likely he's going to be 13, 14 feet tall, maybe 14 and a half, maybe 15 feet tall to fit in. And he's going to be 4, 5, or 6 feet wide.
Thousands of pounds. You need
Yes, thousands of pounds.
iron to
Now,
hold you up.
yeah. Now, we get giants, let's say like Orontes or Achilles, which would be about 12 feet tall in post-Diluvian giants, and their second incursion of giants created after the flood as well. In the Ugaritic texts and in the Epic of Gilgamesh and other languages recording Gilgamesh, they record him as 11 cubits tall and 4 cubits wide. So he'd be 19 feet tall as king of Uruk, 6th generation after the flood. And almost 7 feet wide. Well, would be 7 feet wide on a royal cubit.
Well, yeah, and what about all the bones that they've been finding? And I
Yeah.
mean, they're way taller than that. Even there's some that are taller
Yeah.
than that.
Yeah, which I think the antediluvian giants or the post-diluvian giants were larger because there was some sort of restrictions that were put on after Genesis 6:3, and God knew that their giants would show up after the flood. He knew everything that was going to happen. So whether they survived, or I think what fits better biblically is a second creation, particularly with accounts all around the world that there was a second creation. And we have the Ugaritic text that lines up perfectly, and why the Bible distinguishes Rephaim from Nephilim. Lots
And
of
so
sort of, yeah.
can I ask you a question about that
Yep.
now, being in common day and with all of the DNA manipulation and all of the things they've been working on for a very long time? I think they've perfected it and to make them look more like us now in a physical frame.
Oh, I
Do
think
you have
that's
any?
part of it. I think that's part of it. But also remember that there was this inability to reproduce, which is why they want to bring Baal and Anat back to create more Rephaim. And of course, the other question is where are they trying to bring him back from? Of course, he's killed in the Ugaritic text, but you can't kill something immortal.
Right.
So they did the same crimes as his father El did and Ashtaroth did. They created Nephilim before the flood. Baalim and Anat created Rephaim after the flood, sometime before Babel. And those are the people that in the Babel dispersion, the humans moved and lived amongst. And of course, the Canaanites moved in and with the Rephaim in the covenant land. And so they're gone and they're in the pit prison. So it's important to understand that these giants were not only just created again after the flood in like manner as was done as Genesis 6:4 talks about, but it makes more perfect sense as to why we're being familiarized with the Baalim gods in the Bible versus some of the other ones, because those are the ones that are appropriate to the commonality of the story. And that this fertility issue is also rooted in the word for terrible one, Arit, where it gives all these descriptions like stout for these giants and stuff like that, but also childless and some sort of fertility issue.
Yeah.
And so to go extinct, they have to intermarry with humans. And that's where hybrids come from.
That's where you get the specific bloodline families.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, when you have like Timnah marrying Amalek, that I cover a lot in book 1, and it really is something that if you want to focus more on for the hybrids in book 2, it's one of those cases to look like. And I'll identify in book 1 very curious tribes that go back to the Table of Nations.
Yeah.
Right. And so Timnah is the daughter of Seir, a Horim giant, as Deuteronomy 2 describes them. And Timnah marries Eliphaz, son of Esau, brother of Jacob.
Wow.
And they produce Amalek.
There you go.
And he is named eponymously after the Amalekim that show up in Genesis 14. Remember, this is Genesis 36 and of years later,
Right.
a few hundred years later. And that they go and they live amongst the Amalekim in Petra. And that's one of the reasons why they're married there. But that's a hybrid tribe
Yeah.
that are part of the taller people that the evil report in Genesis 13:33 is talking about. The Amalekites are included. And then repeated again with those people that are taller and the Amorites, it's the same story 40 years later in Deuteronomy 1. So we have a full accounting of the accuracy of what's accurate in the report. Because the
So
Bible doesn't
crazy.
leave these things to chance.
Yeah,
People
that's
like
so
to
crazy,
ignore
man.
the inconvenient passages is all. So who else is listed in some of those hybrids that are taller but are different than the Anakim, as in the kings that are listed, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai?
Mm,
Well, you have the Canaanites,
wow.
and you have the Hittites, and you have
Yeah.
the Amorites, and
All
all
the
of these,
ites.
the
Yeah.
ites. And if
Yeah.
you look in the table of nations under Canaan, he has two sons, Heth, and
Yeah.
Sidon. So we know Canaan is the offspring of Ham, and Heth and Sidon are obviously the sons of Canaan. But we don't get a patriarch for the Amorites. We don't get a patriarch for the Jebusites. 9 of them we don't get patriarchs for. Well, that's a rather mystery. They're the only ones in the table of nations in Genesis 10, and accepting that Genesis 36 is done, I think, to help us understand as an addition to the table of nations, but not to be confused with the 70 sons of Noah, right? Or the 70
Right.
descendants or patriarchs of Noah.
Yeah.
And so you get these 9 patriarchless tribes that are unaccounted for. Well, who else is a patriarch that we get biblically that may not be in the Bible? Well, there's a fellow named Arba, who is the patriarch of the Anakim in the book of Joshua, who's not listed in the table of nations. Why? He's a Rephaim. Who else might we have? As well as you dig into the Rapha name, it can be understood as, in terms of the giant, as a specific generic name for giants in general. It can be a name of a giant. It can be the patriarch of the giants. And it can be understood depending on the context. But as
Right.
the patriarch, that means he started the tribe of giants, right? And
Right.
that tribe, as they're listed in Genesis 15 and 14, are the eponymous name of the tribe taken after the patriarch. And patriarchically, Rapha would come from one of the other names of Baal that we talked about, a
Right.
variation of Raphael. Or Raphael would probably, with the single P, would be more accurately in that spelling. But
Yeah, and that's funny because that's all Satan has and his minions. It's like they have just cheap tricks, what I call
yep,
cheap tricks and
yep,
counterfeits,
yep.
because they can't create. So it's all that's so cool
Yeah.
that you brought that up about Rafa and Raphael and
Yeah.
yeah.
So, and most of this information I'm talking about is all in the Bible, but you can, where you find stuff outside of the Bible and it lines up perfectly,
Trying to
probably
tell you
makes sense.
something.
Yeah, that not all of the biases of influence, that there is some fact within their bias biases. So
Yeah.
now, if you want to look at then how this affects sort of downstream with all of this intermarriage, is they have to continue to intermarry, because if they keep that too tight within 4
So many,
separations, they
yeah,
get
so many
blood diseases.
generations. Yeah.
Yeah. And, like hemophiliac disease, or more appropriate to the Royale would be the Habsburg jaw disease, right? So they have to keep bringing in further outside bloodlines to prevent these specific diseases from entering in.
Oh
And
yeah, they're
so,
very, very, very selective.
yeah. So over time, you get this dilution of the original DNA, the genes that
Right.
they would call as the gene of Isis, from the matriarchal bloodline that continues and passes on the bloodline from that. I don't put it in the book, but I think it's Rh negative bloodline. that's associated with that. And it's the gene that is the introduction into humans that provides for the missing blood type that has a missing antigen. Otherwise, you just can't have a bloodline being added if you just keep it to blood when it's missing something. You can't
Right.
add what's not there.
Right.
So
But then
the
that
logic
can
goes,
go
but
into the quest of them looking for all of these mighty men's bodies and the
oh,
DNA, the
sure,
research they're
absolutely it
doing, and all
does.
the crazy stuff. Like, the real reason
Yeah,
why we went to Iraq here in
yeah.
America and the government. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a document I can send you where you have the links to the email that Clinton was looking for after she was Secretary of State for the tomb of Gilgamesh that they
Yes.
discovered there, and for DNA, and for likely the sarcophagus and possibly the technology. So I have that if people want it. It's not just, and it goes
Yeah.
right to the
Email it to
government
me.
archives. Yeah, goes right to the archives of the government. So
Yeah.
it's
It's
not.
not
Yeah,
conspiracy.
yeah. I like to
Well,
verify
there's a
things.
conspiracy
I'm a
there, but there ain't no
contrarian.
theory there.
Yeah,
It's a
that's
conspiracy, right? Because conspiracy
yeah.
just means one or more people plotting something. It's like,
Yeah, and biblically we understand conspiracy in Hebrew as an unlawful alliance and manifested in a confederacy and a conspiracy to commit treason.
yeah,
Um,
something not good.
yeah, so a group of people doing it. So, and we're
Yeah,
warned about these conspirators in the Bible. So, of course, the spurious ones are going to say, it's a conspiracy theory and make it as a bad thing. Well, no, it's what they're doing. They're
yep.
projecting on onto other people.
Programming you how to think it and how to view it. Yeah.
Yeah. So now, if you want to look at that dilution, I would encourage people to look at Akhenaten of the Pharaoh dynasty, and that's part of the King Tut museums that go around. You can Google Akhenaten, and that's 1,000 years after the flood. Now, with the Akhenaten bloodline, and it's a very, very important and noble bloodline, 1,000 years after the flood
Oh,
in the Royale bloodline. That's why it's so famous and front and center. I mean, there's
Akhenaten.
Akhenaten. Yeah,
Wow.
he changed his name. Had Amenhotep was his name before he converted to worshiping Aten as the main god. So they just,
Hmm.
again, different titles and names for the kings.
Yeah.
Uh, so where I'm going with this is that understand that word sons of God and watcher, and I'll connect this back to the dilution of the bloodlines. And so people say, wow, you're going back to the book of Enoch. Okay, well, let's go biblically first. We have sons of God, and they're sons of God, they're angels in the book of Enoch. And we've talked about them as being angels in the Bible. And we also have the word watcher in the Bible in Daniel 4
Yep.
times. And it's the Hebrew word Ayer. And it's the second part of the word Sair, which produces the transliterated satyr for the devil goat gods.
Wow.
These are degraded watchers as you pull
Wow.
that together. Again, stuff I talk about in book 2, because book 2 is written for Christians.
Right.
Specifically everything that's in the Bible that they need to know about prehistory and start to put that into end time prophecy.
Yeah. Put the pieces together.
Yeah. So in Daniel 4, the watchers come from the throne of God, and they're dealing with religion and governance. And there's a order of angels that look after this. One, and we get a description of them as governing the laws in Daniel 4 and in Isaiah 6 as being the ministers of God working in the fiery stones before God at the altar, in the altar. And these are seraphim angels. And seraphim, seraph is the plural, seraphim is the I am ones plural, as in Nephilim or Rephaim is giant ones. And these are serpent-faced, six-winged dragons or serpents and angels. And so if they took that form, in that physical form, those traits would be passed on. And that's why you have, with the gods that are represented around the world,
I was just
there's
gonna
all this
say
serpentine imagery.
with feathers, the
Yeah,
snakes
yeah,
with wings and the
the plumed serpent and
yes,
the Nagas, the dragon creator gods,
Amuraka, Amuraka.
Osiris,
Yeah.
Zeus, Anki. They're all, and most of the gods running the earth are seraphim. right? They're fallen seraphim, and they're watchers. There's 4 groups of watchers: Ophanim, Cherubim, and Seraphim, and Archangels. And in book 2, I rearranged the standard Dionysius is hierarchy, because archangels come from the presence of God, so they have to be part of the top order.
Yeah.
Just sort of makes sense. So
Just how it lines up.
yeah. So I don't like to have things that are inconsistent, so I like to dig deep into them. So anyways,
Yeah.
the kings before the flood and after the flood, and as depicted on reliefs, as depicted on statues, and as described in their writings, were called serpents. They looked
Wow.
just like their procreators because that DNA was passed on,
Right.
and long-necked. And
Yeah,
so
long necked and yep.
and wouldn't be a long skinny neck, it would be a wide neck, as along with that understanding of the stoutness. So if you look at a pharaoh headpiece, it has this cobra wide neck look to it. That's
Yep. And then
representing,
what does it have up here? Oh, it's a little snake most of the time.
yeah, a snake. Yeah, there's snake imagery all around it. And both Anakim and Og have a meaning that goes back to long neck. So a long, thick neck that they would have had. And that's depicted in these headdresses that would cover this elongated monster skull. And some pictures you get of the pharaohs with these elongated skulls without it, but typically they got a
Or
hat
their
on of some
hats.
sort to
Yeah.
cover it.
Yeah, their
Yeah,
hats. Yeah.
and what you can't do with binding a skull is create larger volume. You just have the same volume, but it's skinnier. And you can't make the sutures disappear. Right? So these are distinct. And so if you look at now Akhenaten on a picture, if somebody Googles it, you're going to see this serpentine face with this elongated skull. And so you have this long protruding chin, these very high cheekbones. And notice that models, they want to have very high cheekbones and certain things about the eyes. That's because
Right.
they want them to be fair, because that's what was thought as beauty within the royales, fair, pale white skins that the giants have. And blonde
Wow.
hair and red hair was also prized. That's where the color hairs of most of the giants.
Yep.
There is a dark-haired variety as well that includes Gilgamesh, but that's
Yeah,
a rabbit hole
Gilgamesh.
I don't want to go down
Yeah,
at this
yeah,
point in
yeah.
time. There's always more doors to open, and so
I'm
you have,
just
yeah. And
curious
then
if
you
you
have these large wraparound eyes, and those eyes would have shone because they're called the shining ones. It would light up a room, and they had these deep voices. So if you Google
oh yeah,
Akhenaten,
their
you're going to
voices.
see a diluted serpentine face that is over 1,000 years old after the flood and after the second creation of the giants. And understand that that's part of the serpentine nature and part of that serpent seed that's talked about as a curse and a prophecy in Genesis 3:15 that gets produced with the giants in Genesis 6. That's the evil seed line that we're going to be fighting as the visible ones as well as the invisible ones, and that we also fight flesh and blood. That's the spurious ones again, as well as those dark angels or those angels in high places that we're fighting, the fallen ones in the
Hmm.
council of the gods and things. And so we need to understand that there's this seed line here that we're dealing against, that is trying to wipe us from the face of the earth. And I make the case that part of the technology that was provided by the angels that merged with the seven sciences took the antediluvian world to a level of technology that we're just catching up to today.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that means with the violence that they had, when you apply that to the violence, then they were on the precipice of completely destroying humankind from the face of the earth. Thus comes the flood.
Yeah, thus comes a flood, and it talks about Noah being perfect in his generations. Where do
Yes.
we get that word from?
Yep.
That wasn't talking about his integrity or his
Yeah.
stature
His
with God.
genealogy,
Yes,
gene.
his genealogy, because right
Yep.
after that, it talks about a devout man or a righteous
Yeah.
man of God.
Yeah. So perfect in spirit, perfect in body.
Original creation. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, we need to understand it. And also we see technology reflected in the word the earth was corrupted. So that's the Hebrew word shakath. And it's just the earth, not the sea, where everything's been corrupted. So that means if everything is corrupted, the DNA is corrupted
Yep.
and the plant genomes. And if that's the case, then it answers the question. And that word means to decay, pervert, ruin, destroy in Hebrew. Something corrupted everything. It's the
Yeah.
angelic technology and the things that are going on. And so it needed to be replaced. And that answers the question why God calls every kind or of representative of the species to the ark, because they're not DNA manipulated,
Right.
the ones he calls to
Yeah.
restart
He
the earth.
knows.
Yeah, everything just starts to fall into place when you have a fuller understanding of things. And so it's this technology that is another key thing that we need to sort of understand that is associated with before the flood and what's going to happen in the days of Noah. It'd be like the days of Noah in that larger context that includes the violence. Who caused the violence? It's the giants.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And I mean,
who ruined the earth? The giants did. They are the ones that get the blood on their hands.
yeah.
So the
And the
fallen angels don't
cannibalism
have to
and
do it. Yeah.
all that stuff, it comes from them. Imagine those sizes that Gary was talking about.
Yeah.
How much do you need to sustain that body
Yeah.
to fill it? And they literally ate out cities and then started eating the people because there
Yep.
was nothing else left to eat. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And if you line up the days of Noah with learning everything about the days of Noah, when you assume that, you assume the violence, but did you assume giants and violence together? Because it's going to be like the days of Noah. Did you imagine the DNA manipulation and the plant genome manipulation? Well, wait a minute. We're doing all of that technology today.
And
It's
the
still
animals
advancing.
and
Yeah.
everything on
And
the
it's
land,
going
like
to
you said.
and it's going to be like the days of Noah. And those are the exact same words translated and written down into Greek, into English, as what went from Hebrew into English in Genesis 9:29, the days of Noah. And his days were, as a generation, 600 years before the flood, 350 years after the flood.
After.
There were gods ruling before the flood, as Deuteronomy 32 talks about, over the 70 nations, and ruling after the flood. There were giants before the flood, there were giants after the flood. You had this universal Enochian mysticism after the flood. You get that reintroduced at Babel, which is the Babylon religion that's coming again, and is the Babylon religion, or the daughter of Babylon, as the Bible describes about it, with the beast empires that's coming again.
Oh, it's here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we need to understand that generation. And I'm not saying that that generation is 600 years or 650 years. Biblically, we get 40 years in the time of the wilderness.
Yeah, either 40
70
or
years,
70. Yeah.
70 in the book of Psalms. But because of the Noah reference, life was limited to 120 years in Genesis 6:3. It may be that one. So we have to be open that if indeed we're in the fig tree generation and in the days or generation of Noah, and I take that back to generation as well in the language in book 2, then
and
we
what
have to.
Yeshua said about this generation shall by no means pass.
Yes.
Heaven and earth will fall away.
Will fall away, but his words will not. Absolutely. And so we want to be careful with end time chronology. What starts it, and then not go beyond the possibilities that whatever date that you're using, you need to factor those three in it. And Christians, we cannot lose our credibility on prophecy. Just when the world is going to need us the most, if indeed we're in the fig tree generation, and I think we are, then we better have it right. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that
the first thing
I think get ahead of themselves.
Yeah, the first thing Jesus says about the end times to all of us: take heed that nobody deceives you. Well, the first thing that tells me is there's going to be a lot of people trying to deceive me.
Yeah.
And he talks about many false prophets.
Yeah. And even even the elect will
even
be
the
deceived.
elect will be deceived. Yeah.
Yes. And the other thing is in terms of his coming back, he doesn't even know the exact hour.
No. Only the Father.
Only the Father,
Yeah,
LLER.
and so he charges us to know the seasons, but like you said, the exact day and hour, no
Yes,
one knows.
yes.
But
So,
we're called to know the
yeah.
season.
So when people are saying, we know when the rapture is going to happen by the day or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, or
Or,
whether he's gonna come take us up before it all happens,
yeah,
or mid or
yeah,
post and all that. I look at it very logically. A long
yeah,
time ago, I was like,
yeah,
well, I'm gonna prepare for the worst and hope for the best and
yeah,
do all I can in his
exactly.
will now.
Yep, yep.
Because if I'm prepared for the worst and he comes before that, I'm not gonna be
You
upset.
have no worries.
I'm not gonna
It's
be
just,
like, why did
yeah,
you come
yeah,
back now?
yeah. But you do have to recognize the season so that you're prepared to look up
Yes, yeah,
because your
definitely.
redemption draws nigh.
But I
So,
never could see how a great falling away would happen. And this was probably like
yeah,
20 years ago,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I was just studying it out for myself. And I was like, oh, that's how I could see a great falling away. If I'm expecting Jesus to come right
yeah,
before the worst time the world's ever seen and he doesn't come, where does
yeah.
that leave my faith?
Yes,
And I've
it'll
got to face
shatter.
that time.
It will shatter a lot. And that's why
Yeah,
in book one, I have a chapter I call the rapture tragedy.
yeah,
If if they have the timing wrong, how many people will lose their faith because of that? So
yeah,
again, we want to make sure we get it right and how we talk about it. And yes, that's exactly what I tell people is I believe it's mid-trib, a little bit after, but I what I do is I hope for a pre-trib, that I prepare for mid-trib or later.
I'll
So
tell people my
yeah,
opinions, but one of my favorite sayings is, hey, nobody in heaven's asking my opinion
yeah.
though.
Well, and and I get just inundated with people on signs and stuff.
Oh,
And
I bet.
we had the great eclipse. It's just another eclipse, but and that this is going to be a sign of the end time, and it's part of the 3 days of darkness. It's just endless,
Yeah, no,
and
it's
we
distraction and call to fear.
it
Distraction and call to fear.
yeah,
And they
and
want to
it's
generate that.
and what they're doing within the Christian community with people in Christianity that are repeating these scare things is we're losing our credibility. I'm not saying there's not going to be signs and wonders for Christians in the end time to take note of, but
Yeah.
we're going to be able to identify it.
Yeah. And nobody's going to be
It's
able to
yeah,
deny it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this is just something that happens with the laws that God put in place in his creation.
Yeah. And
It's
my,
wondrous. I mean, know that, it's spectacular. And as is looking around, we can see these things are created by God, that you have to have a moon to have life here. It has to be, 400 times closer to the earth than the sun in the math to be perfectly blocked out. And that the sun is 400 times bigger than the moon, another
yeah.
coincidence.
Well, I
That's
like
just
to,
all. But here's my point,
yeah.
is that if it's going to be something celestial, we're going to know it as what it is because of how it defies the laws of creation. So it would be like the sun standing still,
Yeah.
in,
Miraculous. Yeah.
yeah, in the with Joshua, so
Yeah.
that they
There's
could
no
finish the
debate about
battle.
it.
Yeah,
But
it's going to be the earthquake and the darkness at the crucifixion. It's going to be like stars working out of their normal orbit
jurisdiction,
together
place.
for
Yeah.
the star of Jesus. It's going to be preternatural in a way that can only come from God. That's how you're going to know the signs.
Yeah, and I feel more of those signs because they are signs, right? But I
Yep.
think they're signs to awaken more of his children, and they're signs and warnings to the evil ones here that I'm still coming. Get
Yeah.
ready.
Yeah. Exactly. And
Remember who really rules on high. But yeah, that's so amazing. You're going to be well received here because it's called, my channel's called Get Closer, and my ministry focus is all about helping children of God understand their authority in Christ Jesus, seated with him in the heavenly places and taking our dominion here in earth, but to experience him for yourself, to not just listen to anybody, research it all for yourself, and to begin turning your word into prayer dialogue with God. and asking for his Holy Spirit to show you things
Yeah.
and researching stuff for yourself and having a spiritual
Yeah.
experience for yourself.
That's one of, the same message I like to provide is, would I love non-Christians to hear what I say and read the Bible? Absolutely. Would I love Christians who haven't been taught any of this to want to dig deeper into the Bible? Absolutely. That's what I want. I'm not here to convert people. I'm
Right.
only here to give you information and to encourage you to fully understand why you believe what you believe.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's a reason behind it. And do you even know the reason, or is it just something that you grew up with, or something you were constantly taught over and over again? And do you
Yeah.
want to maybe look at things differently
Yeah.
and just be prayerful about it so you're not
Yeah.
misled?
Yeah, and if we are indeed in the end times, in the fig tree generation, then our churches we can't rely on. And I
No,
think we saw, and I hate to be hard on the church because I'm not here to divide Christians,
right.
um, but if their performance in the pestilence that was here will be any indication of how they're going to be part of the world and its wisdom going forward, you can see that apostasy coming full fold, and it's going to,
Oh, yeah.
as Jesus describes, family against family turning each other in. It's
Yeah.
not it's not going to be pleasant. So we need to prepare, and we need to try and plant seeds with people to say, hey, if you don't think something's not right with the world right now, that something's off from what it was, you have seen nothing yet,
Yet.
and you are not going to be able to imagine what is coming.
Right.
And the only way you're going to be able to prepare yourselves is to learn, learn
Yeah.
about the Bible.
Learn and
And
taste and know for
yeah,
yourself. Have those
yeah,
experiences for yourself now in
yeah.
Him.
And the two things that God and Jesus promise us, He doesn't promise that we won't go through tribulation.
Right.
In fact, we're told we're going to go through tribulation.
Yes.
And what we are promised is that we're going to be saved from two things: the wrath, because it's not for the righteous.
Nope. Yeah.
So that's the year of the Lord's wrath. That is the last year. And secondly, um, the hour of trial, hour of temptation, because even the elect would be deceived. And so
Well,
that
unless those
hour,
days were shortened, no flesh would be left alive
yeah,
too. Yeah.
yeah. And so that's why we're saved from the wrath of God, because that's what at the point where Jesus comes back, I think for his third time, is for the Armageddon battle, so that not everything is going to be completely destroyed, so that you can have a millennium and people surviving into it. So now, I think that hour of trial, as it's talked about in the seven churches in Revelation, is the same hour. Hora is the Greek word, that's in Revelation 17. The hour, Hora, that the 10 kings of the seventh empire hand their power over
Over
to
to the one.
Antichrist, to destroy Babylon, whom the 10 kings grow to hate because it controls them and grows. They don't get all the wealth. Babylon does. So, and that's the same hour that's described for the destruction of Babylon in the summary of the last 3.5 years in Revelation 14. I think starting at about verse 7 or 8. And also the hour that Babylon is destroyed in the details of that as the first major event in the last 3.5 years in Revelation 18. And that's and when you get the last times as the time of many antichrists showing up on the earth that the epistles of John are talking about, that last times is the Greek word hora as well. So,
Hmm.
and Jesus talks about the hour, hora, that he's coming.
Yeah.
It's
Be
all
watchful.
watch for the patterns that the Bible uses so that you can recognize and connect verses. And don't let people say you can't, because that's when you have to start dismissing and reimagining verses. So
Yeah. When
Trump,
people take it out of context versus trying to
yeah,
connect it.
yeah. People will tell you that you can't connect trumpets to the end time other than the trumpets in Revelation. Old Testament, New Testament, if it's prophetic, if it's a prophecy, that trumpet's there to mark the time.
Yeah. All you got to do is look at previous prophecies that's been fulfilled
Yeah.
in Yeshua. And I mean, hello.
Yeah. And look for Jesus' sign that's talked about in the oration that he provides to Mark and Luke or that Mark and Luke and Matthew record, to the same words that are used in the Old Testament, not necessarily for the church, but for the reconciliation of Judah and lost Israel. Because that's part of his coming, as in Hosea 9:7, in the days of his visitation, just as Luke talks about the days of the Son of Man, not singular, but days. He's coming for rapture, second Exodus, and Armageddon.
Yeah.
And
yeah, he's not going to be the Jesus everybody makes him out to be. He's going to be a bad dude.
When you
the
see
Valley
the
of
word
Jezreel.
when you see prophecies, end time prophecies in the Old Testament that say banner, ensign, or standard, that's Jesus's sign. When you start to read those words in that context, and the best way you do it all goes back to the same Hebrew word, but understand, you start to connect how you can do Old Testament prophecies and connect with New Testament prophecies. Even though it's written in Greek versus Hebrew, there's cognate words that are in place that you can use. Like you have Philipses for tribulation, as in the tribulation of the saints in Revelation 7, or the great tribulation in Matthew 24:21, which is a separate from the tribulation of the saints. And unfortunately, we don't get good translations as well. So Philipses is translated before the abomination in Jesus's chronology as affliction. And it's also translated elsewhere as affliction. It's part of the meaning, but from a timing perspective, you have to understand that there's two tribulations. And so how I will produce now an example to show why you have to be careful with this is that in where it says in the great tribulation versus the tribulation of the saints that happens before the abomination, which is Revelation 7, which the ones in Revelation 6 are told to wait for to come out of the great tribulation, Philipses. Then you have the great tribulation of the world not seen since creation. It's distinctly different. And then in the cognate verse in Mark 13, where you get that same prophecy after the abomination, it doesn't say tribulation there. It's translated as affliction, and it's the same Greek word. And it's the cognate word for Sarah in Hebrew for the time of Jacob's quote unquote trouble.
Great trouble, yeah.
And the kickoff to the second Exodus that Jacob is going to be saved out of and busted out by the breaker by Jehovah for the second Exodus, as the book of Micah links into those passages. And that it's the same word that's used when Michael stands in the time of trouble, the time of the resurrection of the Jewish people, which is the midpoint of the last 7 years, when Michael's also standing in Revelation 12, the battle with Satan and his angels. After Antichrist has come to power. And Antichrist has come to power because in Daniel 8:10, he is going to try and raise his throne to heaven like Lucifer tried to do, or Satan tried to do. And he's going to throw down some of the starry host after he comes to power.
Yeah.
It's the same battle, and it's the same time frame.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a big proponent for going hard after this research, and your books are just so the knowledge that you have and that you compiled is so amazing, and it gives you a lot of context and a lot of stuff to research out for yourself. But I'm a big proponent of asking for Holy Spirit, because Yeshua said he is the great teacher. He is to teach you all things and bring into remembrance everything I said.
Yep.
So, I mean, rely on him.
Pray for that extra support.
Yes.
Believe me, so that's why book 2 has a little bit different subtitle to it. So the subtitle of book 1 is how the descendants of giants, how secret societies and the descendants of giants plan to enslave humankind.
Yeah.
Book 2 is called How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps to Define End Time Prophecy.
Wow. That's cool. I can't wait to get it.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And
What I was gonna, oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, so book 1 is as unique as book 2, but in a different way and targeted at Christians. So it's going to cover off things that no other book has covered off.
That's
Um,
awesome.
it's it's as unique as book 1, and a lot of people like the work of Dr. Heiser. I've not read his work, I've only heard about it, but from the little I've seen for excerpts and what people have told me about it, this book 2 would be also Genesis 6 Conspiracy 1 on steroids for Christians, and it's not redundant. It's additional information, and it's mostly biblically based. And it would be Dr. Heiser on steroids. So when I talk about the application of Thlipsis or Hora or Rapha or Saba or any of those types of words that I've been sort of flashing around, you get that
Yep.
in book 2. You get the Christian information you need to check my veracity.
Well, yeah, and the cool thing about book 1 is that it's titled and laid out too. So if you only want to know, like, put a couple pieces together of this secret society or this giant
Yep.
group or this point in the history, he's laid it out beautifully to where it's
Yeah.
like subcontext all the way through. So you can just go right to that and learn about that if
Yep.
you want.
Yeah. So I'm going to take back, and as I give you information, the first section is just information Christians need to read the Bible in a larger context.
Yeah.
And it's just so important. But you don't have to read those, but you'll want to go back to read them. But as I move forward, I mean, I'm going to take all of these patriarchless nations that are listed in the Bible, and I'm going to take them back to a Rephaim patriarch.
Wow.
I'm going to give all the giant nations that I could identify, show you how we understand that these are giant nations, and take them back to a Rephaim patriarch as well.
Wow.
Then I'm going to go through with all that information on the angelic order, the information you need in one, all the different kinds of hybrids. 6 to 9 feet would be the hybrids, more 7 to 9 feet would be the general average versus giants being taller.
Yeah, this is the kind of stuff you're not gonna get in a seminary school or going to
no,
somebody's
not at
theology
all. Yeah.
lessons. And
Then I'm going to use that base of information to walk through the War of Giants in a way that I don't do in book 1, just
oh,
on
cool.
steroids.
Cool.
And then I'm going to cover off all the different battles and campaigns of the Exodus Wars. So it
Oh,
starts with the
wow.
Battle of Rephidim, the Battle of Atherinum 40 years later, the Eastern Campaign, the Central Campaign, the Northern Campaign, and the
Wow.
Mountain and Southern Campaign. Then I'm going to go into the book of Judges and show you how those wars are associated with Israel and the people attacking them are connected to giants, and show you where you get that information. Go through all of that through the book of Judges. Then I'm going to do the same thing in the wars of King Saul, the wars of King David, and the wars
King
of King
David.
Solomon.
Yeah, wow.
And
Yeah,
then I'm going to
because
get into end
dude,
time prophecy.
just from the and then if after that
and some secret society stuff as I do the
wow,
transition.
that's
So
amazing, man. But yeah, the dudes that David's mighty men, oh my goodness, they were no joke.
no,
You
they
just
were,
read about that in the Bible and you'll be like, what? And it's
yeah,
and you'll see the offspring and the DNA manipulation and the lion men of Moab, and
yeah,
it makes sure telling you in the Bible, this
yeah,
is all Bible, people. It tells you about the guy who killed 2 lion-like men of
yep,
Moab, and you
yeah,
can't describe them as, you can't make it seem like they were just lions, because right after that it says, and he
yeah,
killed a
yeah,
lion on a snowy
yeah,
day.
yeah. So I'm going to save it for book 4 on really getting detailed into that. I'll
Wow.
finish book 3. I do make some references to these different kinds of giants in book 2. So I would encourage people to look at cherubim
Mm.
as,
Cherubim.
yeah, yeah, four-faced
Yeah,
um,
it's like, what the
angels.
heck?
Yeah,
I can't imagine the job that of John and Ezekiel and Isaiah and all these great men of faith that we had, our
Yeah.
fathers of our faith, describing this stuff that they're
Yeah.
experiencing and seeing in the heavens.
Yeah.
You know?
So you have, and understand that these were watchers.
Right. Yeah, and there's
And
good watchers and
okay.
the fallen ones, right?
Yep. So they had a human head. They had a face also of an ox or a bull. I would go for bull. They had a face of an eagle or a bird
Yeah.
and face of a lion.
Yeah.
Now, um, one of the kings in the War of Giants, Arioch, means lion-like.
Mm.
Ari and Ariel is in lion and lion of God. You should take that back to Hebrew. And there's an Avim god, a giant, one of the post-diluvian giants, and they lived in different pockets. I'll give you ideas where these giants lived as well in book 2. And one of the areas was in the Mesopotamian region, and the Avim god worshipped a god named Nergal as the war god of the Sumerian pantheon. And he's depicted as a lion-faced god.
Oh, wow.
And so I think, and you get lion-faced gods in most of the pantheons. Egyptian has a number of them, whether it's Mahis or Bast and other ones, Sekhmet. So if they produced giants, they would produce ones that looked like them if they took the face of a lion.
Hmm.
So now if you can imagine that you have a eagle
Right.
and you look at Anunnaki on reliefs in Sumeria, you have these wing creatures, really stocky legs and wide, like that sort of kind of a stoutness, but these are angelic beings. And they have wings, and they're depicted in 2 ways. One has a human's head, and one has an eagle's head,
Oh, yeah.
both of a cherubim, right?
Wow.
And so if they took a human's head, maybe that was the dark-haired variety that Gilgamesh in the Syrian
Wow.
giants and some of the Greek giants were produced by, and more warrior-like, as in the
Mm.
warrior gods, just as cherubim were like a warrior-like angel, just as they protected Eden with a flaming sword
Right.
before the flood after the ostracization of Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you look at the creatures that are described as gods and giants in Southeast Asia, Tengu gods, which are watcher gods like the seraphim gods and part of the same grouping of gods there, they're depicted as birds and serpents. So in this case, a cherubim taking one face. And they produce Tengu warriors and priests, Tengu. If people Google that, they're going to get these eagle-faced, bird-faced creatures. And in the Popol Vuh, these are the Xibalba demigods that had owl faces. And there's one particular one that's the House of Camazotz as a branch of them. That's the House of the Bat. And you Google
Wow.
Camazotz and you get the outfit that Batman wears. But it's absolutely
Wow.
so. And when cherubim
Wow.
took an image on the earth, they would generally only take one face. So if you see a sphinx, it's going to have one face, whether it's a human or a lion's face. If you look at the caribs, which are the same thing throughout the Middle East, they're going to have, a bull's face. They're going to have, you know, one of the faces of the cherubim. They're the same angelic creature. And the gargoyles would be the bird face.
Wow. Yeah. Some kind of bird too.
Yeah, some kind of bird. So I in book 4, I'm going to look at some of
All of
these
those are
different kinds.
ancient symbolisms that you can find in every cult, like all the different
Yeah.
ancient symbolisms in the cultures, from the coat of arms to the gods they worship to
Yep.
yeah, all kinds of stuff. That's so interesting. I was going to ask you. Oh yeah.
Just so we don't get this totally without some biblical support, and I won't spend a whole time on this. So along with that Avim god with the Nergal god, and this sort of takes it into another classification of gods. You have a god that the Avim worship that was named Nibaz, Nibaz. And you take that back to Hebrew, and it means a barking god.
Wow.
And it was depicted with a dog's head.
Whoa.
So now you start to get into dogmen and stuff like that, and you look at gods like Anubis, and we get references to jackals as gods
Yeah, the whole
in the
chimera
Bible.
thing, right?
Yeah, that if they and there's so much historical information on the dog warrior gods. Low, they're classified as lower than the other types of giants, and mostly were mercenaries. Um, and so Anubis created so many of these giant warriors, he created a city for them called Sinopolis, as the Greeks called it. Opolis means city. Sino is their word for cynocephalus for dogmen.
Whoa. The dog man city.
Yeah. So and
That's
they're all
crazy.
over the world as well too. So
Yeah, so have you I would waiting to ask you, have you heard about the Native American encounters here just in America, North America, and with I think it was Wild Bill who had a really one of the old West guys. I can't remember if it was Wild Bill or if it was a different character along the same, very similar name. He was really good friends with natives, and they took him and showed him the caves about their ancient drawings and showed him femur
yep.
bones that were bigger,
Mhm.
like as big as him. And
Yep.
then he has a diary that they've done away with of depictions of him drawing stuff that was in the caves, and they had a dark-haired giant Rephaim
Yep.
looking scary dude with claws
Yep.
having one buffalo in the hand and
Yep.
ripping off the other one
Yeah.
while he's running with the
Yeah.
buffalo. And
Gilgamesh like in terms of the
yeah,
size,
yeah, it
right?
was like,
So in
whoa.
depictions. So
And they knew
so
about this stuff. And that was like,
sure.
1800.
All the First Nations in North America, Central America, South America talk about the giants.
Yep.
And the Hopi say that the original giants were they understood them as the White Snake Clan that came from an island in Atlantis, in the
Wow.
Atlantic Ocean. And so some of them were seraphim, but also you get these, red-haired ones, which is the more common one that's talked about. But yeah, and it's trouble is I didn't do a lot about Africa or First Nations because it's all oral traditions. You don't get anything sort of in writing for
Right.
history. So, but I recognize that they're in all the different cultures around the world, and I think the First Nations counting, and they're like I say, it's little people, Sasquatch, Nephilim
Well, I've
are
heard the whole
all in
thing why
all
they went like
cultures.
this.
Yeah,
And they said,
yeah,
how? They
yeah,
wanted to see if you had six fingers.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. That's why they go, how?
yeah,
Like from afar. Be like,
yeah,
do I need to get ready to kill you? Or,
yeah. And so there's been a lot of discoveries of these bones in North
yes,
America,
Smithsonian
and the
does a
First
good job of
Nations had a
hiding them.
lot of wars against them to eliminate them because you can't live with these tribes of giants that try and wipe you out.
Yeah.
So there's a link that I have that if people want to get a hold of me, just send me a note, and it is old newspaper stories. And
Let me
so
send you an email for that.
yeah, and
You're
what the
already
other
sending me stuff. So,
yeah, well, list all of the stuff because I'll forget because
yeah,
and
I'll
I'll
have
get
to
it.
go
Yeah,
back and listen to the
yeah,
recording because
yeah,
this is a lot of
yeah,
amazing
yeah.
information anyway.
And on this has a spreadsheet where it's going to give you descriptions and information sort of in summary on a spreadsheet. But as you scroll to the right on the Excel spreadsheet, it has a link to the newspaper story.
Oh, wow.
And you can go read it for yourself from the original. And it ranges from 1850 to about 1950 in North America. There's a few
It's,
other ones in there from Mexico and a couple other places, but predominantly in the United States.
I'm
Um,
surprised they still have those up as good a
yeah,
job as they do trying to hide
yeah,
all
I
of that
know.
stuff.
So, yeah, so it's just one of those things to show you that there's again there's a conspiracy. There's no way of getting around it to hide this information. So what happens with all of these discoveries in North America and all of these ones that are listed on the spreadsheet is that two things will happen once the discovery happens. A, the local university is going to be called. They're going to send their people out. They're going to pack it up, take it to the university, call the Smithsonian. They go there and then they're never seen again.
Nope.
Or the more direct approach is whoever discovers it calls the Smithsonian directly. They come get it all,
And
take
it's
it
never
back to the
seen again.
Smithsonian, and then it's never seen again. So,
Yeah. They probably covered up and done, who knows, dumped it in the ocean or kept it in their secret wherever they do with it.
Yeah.
More, they have more stuff they've tried to hide than they'll ever be able to put in a Smithsonian
Yes,
buildings.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating, man. Yeah, thanks for coming on. Hopefully we can get you on again.
sure.
After I get a hold of copy too and read that. And I'm looking forward to the other books you mentioned that you're working on. That's amazing, Gary.
Yeah, so it'll be, I'm spending obviously the last this year promoting heavily book 2, and I've started book 3. I'm actually rewriting it, so but it'll be a couple of years before that's going to be out and available, I think.
You think there's just a little bit of research that
Yeah,
goes
just
into
a
this,
little bit that
people.
goes into it. Yeah.
Well, bless you, man. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for coming on. I had a blast, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a lot of information and a lot of wisdom out of this and connect some dots for
Yep.
themselves. And
Yep.
once again, if you want to buy Gary's book, I highly encourage you do. 1 and 2 are available, and you can get those at Amazon or Gary's site. And what's your site again?
Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the number 6conspiracy.com. So go to contact the author to get some documents. I do those at all no charge, or you want to ask me a question. Typically, it takes me 4 to 6 weeks to get back to you, but I will get back to you. I do them in order, so I don't miss any of them. And there's new ones coming in every day. So,
Get your questions in now.
yeah,
All right. Thank you. And God bless you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And thank you, Gary, for coming on.
terrific. Thank you.